succeed. And at the same time, when you own and operate the buildings, there's a real motivation to make sure your audiences are having great experiences. And so I think when you put it all together, the days of sort of sitting back and just waiting for somebody to call are over. And if you are lucky enough to be in a market where you don't have to do anything and everybody just calls you, good for you. And that's awesome. And that might work. But I'd say in the majority of the country, that's not the case anymore.
Yeah. And then, I think you were the first performing arts center that I worked with. And honestly, at first, when I first met you and heard what you did, we hadn't worked with any performing arts centers. So I was kind of counting my blessings when you said, hey, yeah, this could be really helpful to me. So anyway, like why did you go with Prism early on, and what has that been like for you? Yeah.
Well, in all honesty, you sort of heard my history. So at the point I met you, I'd been booking shows for, 20 years, like, in every format and every sort of deal structure you can imagine. I mean, I think just in my years at Wagner Noel, I did like 300 deals on my own as our single talent buyer. And what I knew was in Dayton, I couldn't do that. I couldn't achieve it. And so my team was younger. They weren't as experienced. And I was just putting it all together. I think I just started in Dayton like 5 years ago when we met, Matt, or maybe I was still in Indianapolis. I can't remember. Either way,
you had just started in Dayton. Yeah. Okay. And yep.
But either way, what was interesting, I was like, hey, I need a tool where we make it easier, where I can use it as a teaching tool so people really understand what they're doing, but also have some built-in safeguards. Because I had honestly been burnt like a couple years before that with one of my people making a huge mistake on a show that ended up costing me a lot of money and a lot of headaches and aggravation. And as I went back through, I was like, if we did like a forensic audit, how much money have we killed ourselves on over the years by not having a structure to work within on approvals, on offers, on settlements, and everything else in between? And also, how much time and money do we spend trying to manage these processes so manually? So when we first met, I had always been looking for those tools. And I've always been an early adopter of things too, whether it was like venue management programs, ticketing systems. The biggest thing we did in Dayton was invest huge money in all of our web and digital assets, and everything from marketing to ticket management and inventory management. And so to me, the way people consume content, but also consume like purchasing processes, all of it has changed so dramatically. And to put it in perspective, I started at a time in this business where one of my first jobs, I said I got a job with Promoter. That job, my first job, was to drive around to record stores and collect the money and give them more hard tickets that went in a big box on the wall so we could sell tickets. Like that was, when you did a show, you printed all the tickets on little tickets and you took them to all the outlets that sold them. I mean, we were still doing that because you have to think, this was like 96, 97. AOL came out in like 95, I think. There was no such thing as an online purchase. So, phone was like, ooh, fancy, get your telecharge. So having been through like that system of all these different, technology breakthroughs, I think for me, Prism was just a new natural fit. And at the time, to be honest, I don't think you had any idea what Prism would become. You knew what you thought you wanted it to become. And I just thought it was a cool thing to get on board because nobody else was really trying or willing. I think I talked about failure before, and like, I'm always willing to fail. I don't think you really change things that much if you're not willing to. And I think you always had that spirit of like, let's try stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you were definitely the first performing arts center that I worked with. And now we work with, hundreds of them and thousands of venues around the country. And it's thanks to, folks like you and the feedback that you've been giving that we've been able to continuously like adopt the system. And, PFM coming on board was a huge help to that. So I'm really grateful for, you seeing that early on and, helping us adopt in general. Yeah.
It's really funny. I mean, true story. So I'm here in New York, as I said, and we had probably leaked meetings yesterday. And I told you earlier, as soon as we finish this, I'm actually running to a show and another show tonight. But what's cool is I had like 2 different people ask me about Prism last night. And it's not like I go around saying, hey, Prism, Prism, Prism. Like always am willing to talk to people about what I'm doing that's working, what's helping my team, how we're using tools. And those are tools, everything from, social marketing and the way we, um, the way that we sell tickets, the way we model subscription accounts, the way we handle customer service team. I take a lot of what I learned in the sports business for how we handle season tickets, like very differently than a typical Broadway experience. But when you put it all together, I think Prism's just, been a really cool tool. We just signed on for co-promote, which I'm really stoked about, because that's been another area where I'm like, okay, how often are we really keeping up to date? And I think last year we did like 230 settlements outside of our own shows, which were like another couple hundred. So it's just a
And
lot of
just to be
work
clear,
on
we
it.
just launched the CoPro feature, which is what Ty is referencing here. And in the spirits of your early adopters, you were one of the first ones to sign up for CoPro. So yeah, thank you again for that. But sorry, continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and my team's stoked, to be honest. They were like, I mean, we used to like, and we're just starting to use it right now. Like this is all like very current as you're saying this, but like, we're doing it in an accounting system right now, which does not do a good job of helping us settle these things out. So the fact that, we're going to use it for rentals. I mean, we're expanding it more and more and more, but what's cool is, hey, we're also putting like, here's your estimate, and we're going to show you actuals versus estimate and all these things side by side. And it's super transparent. And I find the whole thing makes the process easier. And it's on both sides. I actually got an email this morning from a show we just did over the weekend. And somebody's like, hey, they were going back through our offer. And they're like, hey, because it was so clear, you forgot to include this buyout for these things. Can you send it? And I was like, crap, it cost us a few grand. But it's also cool because it was like a side by side comparison. And so if I'm an agent, I love that. You know what I mean? Like I can look at it so clearly. And I know we put that up because I can look at it instantly in Prism. And I was actually looking at it on my phone. And I'm like, yeah, that was the deal. And let's put it in. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's just so many positives from it. And I think the whole point of technology is it has to continue to evolve. And I feel like your team is willing to continue to evolve. It's not like it's never, I can't imagine you get to a point where you're like, it's done, the product's done, like we're done. Like, can you imagine that?
No, it's what drives me the most is like continuing to pump out technology. I just have a lot of fun with that. And I get this question a lot, like, oh, what do you want to like do with your career? And I'm like, honestly, I just have a lot of fun doing this. So hopefully I can, do it as long as possible. And when, software systems are done, I think that's, trouble. It's like, okay, what
Yeah.
do you mean it's done?
Well, one of my
Yeah.
favorite things was early on, I was talking about Broadway and I was, telling you, and I'm like, and I think it could do this eventually and this and that. And that was when I think most of your clients were smaller promoters that did single rooms, a lot of GA stuff. And it was, very, very, very early days. And now I look where we are, and you're talking about other people, and we're talking about Broadway platforms and co-promote and all these things that are coming together. And so for me, I think it'll just continue to be a valuable tool long term as, your team keeps adding functionality. So it's been pretty
Well,
cool.
thank you. I appreciate it. And like, I think to your point about is Prism ever going to be done, and is the industry ever going to stand still? And hypothetically, if the industry ever did stand still, then it could possibly be done. But the industry is always shifting and moving, and I think this could be an interesting segue to a question that I would like to wrap up with is, where do you see the performing arts space moving, the industry moving as a whole? That's a big question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like obviously we came out of the pandemic and there was, all the shows went down and then all the shows kind of came out at once. And now I think the industry is finding an equilibrium. And, what do you see in the next year? What are you excited about in the next 5 years? What do you see in the future in terms of like, yeah, the performing arts industry and what people should pay attention to?
Yeah, it's such a huge question. And I have a lot of colleagues who've been doing this a lot longer than I have. A lot of the performing arts center CEOs, they're 70 years old. I mean, that's pretty typical. And so I like to listen a lot. And one thing we're all experiencing universally is that the audiences for commercial programming, popular programming have really come back, and we're seeing strong growth. Live Nation had their biggest year ever. 22 has been this massive year, except for like the more traditional performing arts, symphonies, ballets, operas. And so I think a process that was already happening where some of those audiences were aging out and they weren't being replaced has just probably been and so that's scary. That's scary to all of us. And so I think everyone is looking at their programming and how does it connect to audiences. And I think a lot of our legacy arts organizations, from the small ones or the medium size like Dayton to the biggest arts organizations in the world, are going to have to really look at, are we relevant to audiences anymore? And if we're not, how do we become relevant? And how do we reach young people so that they'll understand what we do and why it's important to them?
I'm so glad you brought that up, and it actually just made me flash back. I went to an orchestra in Santa Barbara at the Granada Theater, and it was my favorite concert that I've been to in a long time. There was 3 different sets. They performed a piece from a local conductor that was like that was narrated live by like a local Chumash woman, Native American, like sharing Native American wisdom, and a whole orchestra that was playing. And then Alessio Bax sat in on a set.
Wow.
Yeah, and then they ended with a Mozart piece, and I just got my soul blown out of my body for 3 hours, and I could have gone 10 more hours, and it was half sold. And the average person in the crowd was, I think, over 75, 80. I really appreciated that. I think that's amazing. But I left thinking like, well, what's going on here? Because I'm 33. I just picked up the cello. I have a growing interest in classical music. But it didn't have that, that pull that a rock concert might have, but the music that was extraordinary. I mean, I think that was the best concert I've been to in the last 10 years. And I couldn't help but think that, some of it is marketing. Some of it is just people's taste. But I think if more people our age knew about it, I think it could have a reemergence. Like the industry is always oscillating. Like, 10 years ago, everyone's like, oh, everything's going electric, and goodbye to like instruments being performed. And like now, like guitar players are like back and better than ever. And everyone's like, oh, electronic DJs, no big deal. And like, obviously a classic music performance is far in the other direction. But I think classic music is incredible, and it's not just classic music, but like, what have you had the same thoughts as me? And what do you think it will take to breathe more life into those more traditional performances? And I also want to say, for the record, I really love being in a space where someone who is 90 or 80 was like, I want to be in the same room as them, but I'm just wondering why it wasn't, more full, and how can there could be a little bit of a balancing, energy there, or do you believe in classic music and being able to pull people in, or is it just adopting the content that you're putting on there, and that's just going to have the audience it's going to have? I was just rambling there for a second, but I think you can pick up my word storm there and run with it.
No, I'm 100% with you. So I think there's 2 things that are driving it. We stopped giving kids arts education like 20 years ago. So even like going to school in the 80s, I was constantly exposed to like band and instruments and all these things. And I mean, like I'll get sort of deep on this, and we could do like a whole nother, I could bring in my whole education team who are experts in this, but I'm going to go back to like some of the legislation in the early 2000s, like No Child Left Behind. And we created all these national standards for testing that kids have to like, basically our kids are taught to tests now. I see it with my kids all the time. Like we teach to the test, and there was no arts components to any of it. And so all of a sudden the schools started pulling all these things out that had been done for so long to create lovers of arts, and especially things like instruments and, not just classical music, but, classical instrumentation more than music. And so we created generations of kids that have no exposure to it. And so they're not just going to magically be like, I want to go check out a symphony, because they don't even have a vocabulary to talk about it. And
Yeah,
it
was me picking up the cello that like got me interested in it,
Yeah.
But so yeah, this is fascinating. Keep going. Yeah.
But in that vein, I think it's also up to the people that work in the arts to make sure, the idea of STEM education becomes STEAM education, and we put arts back into it, because what we're hearing from all the top business leaders is what they want most are people that can communicate. And so, a kid that grows up with theater or dance or music, they learn to work in teams, they learn to communicate, they learn to express their own feelings. I can give you a rundown of so much data about why arts education is important and why it leads to positive outcomes. It prevents self-harm. It leads to, people that are educated and empathetic and team-oriented and really able to deal with their own emotions, which is what we're worried about in all our kids. I have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old, and my 13-year-old loves choir and loves to sing, and it's the favorite part of his day. He's also really good at math. So, it can all work together. But I really think that's what we're missing right now. And so I don't think we're going to fix that overnight. And so the companies will have to keep adapting to what they do and how much they program and for who. But there's not a simple solution to this. There's some really great thought leaders in the space. Aubrey Bergauer, David Taylor, a couple that I, have followed. And I think all of us are saying the right things. We have a huge marketing problem that, people who weren't educated in those segments of the arts are maybe uncomfortable coming because they feel like they don't know enough to come, even if they want to. So we really just have to be accepting and create opportunities to connect to people. Because once you get them there, people are like, this is amazing. Like, I really feel great being here. Or they realize that they love these different forms of music. But I think our job in running venues is just create opportunities, create connections, create places people can experience new things that they want to experience again.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Super fascinating. And like, I think, I'm going to mispronounce this person's name because frankly, I haven't read it, but there's a cello player that's like Billie Eilish's age, his name, and he's in England. He's like Sheku something, Sheku. And I saw him just pop up on NPR, and he just plays the cello, and he's like the same. I think it's very fascinating. He's the same age as Billie Eilish, because like obviously Billie Eilish is incredible, but then here's this person playing the cello, and seeing that pop up in NPR. I think the younger generation is, has interest in all types of different types of music, and it is a complex problem, but I think it will create a more beautiful world into the future. If there's more kind of like classic music infused into our upbringing, and just music in general. And like, I was in a family, thankfully, where I grew up playing the piano, and arts was emphasized. And yeah, I'm a big believer in that as well. So I'm curious to stay in the loop with like where that goes. And once again, I think it's just an incredible thing for society if that, does continue to increase. But really, really fascinating. Thanks a lot for sharing that perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's critical to us being able to stay relevant. So, honestly, also along with that, be willing to adapt, because music and what is considered art changes. And so I talked earlier about, meet people where they are. So meet them where they are, but then create new opportunities for them to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. There's like so much more that we can go, but I know you're about to go to an awesome performance, so I'll let you go. But that's definitely a great topic to end on. And yeah, once again, thank you, Ty, for all the support and help along the way. Thank you for this awesome conversation. I super appreciate you.
Oh, I'm so glad. And thanks for the opportunity. It's cool to just, I don't know how many people will see this, but it's been really fun to sort of take a journey down memory lane of like how I ended up where I am. So
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I'm gonna stop the recording. Here we go.